You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hi, my name is Barbara Mendes-Jorge, and I am a sustainability communications expert based in Brussels, Belgium. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today is the first of a two-part episode with Małgorzata Gołębiewska, Team Leader for Environmental Footprint and Green Claims in the Directorate General for Environment, European Commission. Małgorzata has worked at the European Commission for 15 years on a range of environmental and climate change-related topics. An economist by training, Małgorzata also holds a postgraduate certificate on sustainable development from UCL. This episode's theme is upcoming EU ESG and greenwashing legislation affecting your business. For the next two episodes, we'll be focusing more deeply on legislation, specifically the EU Green Claims Directive, to tackle greenwashing in business-to-consumer communication. And we're here with Małgorzata, who was responsible for its preparation and negotiations. So, what is the EU Green Claims Directive? In March 2023, the European Commission put forward a directive proposal to help combat greenwashing, setting out requirements on how to substantiate environmental claims and introduce rules on environmental labelling schemes. The then Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, said at the time, "Green claims are everywhere. Ocean-friendly t-shirts, carbon-neutral bananas, bee-friendly juices, 100% CO2 compensated deliveries, and so on. Unfortunately, way too often these claims are made with no evidence and justification whatsoever. This opens the door to greenwashing and puts companies making genuinely sustainable products at a disadvantage." Małgorzata herself says, "The objective is to ensure that consumers can trust environmental claims and labels and make more sustainable choices, while businesses benefit from a level playing field when it comes to information about environmental performance of products, services, or organizations." And following the usual EU legislative procedures, the Green Claims Directive proposal will now be subject to the approval of the European Parliament and the Council. So welcome, Małgorzata. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about greenwashing and the EU Claims Directive today.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
Could I start by asking you to introduce yourself and explaining your role at the European Commission a bit more?
Certainly. Over the past 15 years, I have worked in the European Commission on a number of sustainability related topics. I started in 2008 in Directorate General for Climate Action, where I worked on CO2 emission standards for new passenger cars and light commercial vehicles, and also on CO2 car labeling, so information to consumers. I then moved to work in Directorate General for Environment in a policy area which is vital for circular economy, notably to work on waste directives, where I focus on recycling targets for municipal waste, separate collection of waste, economic instruments supporting better waste management, such as, for example, extended producer responsibility. Then I continued with circular economy in my role as policy coordinator in the European Green Deal unit of the Secretariat General. And now I lead the team working on environmental footprint methods, a life cycle assessment method developed by the European Commission to calculate the environmental impacts of products and organizations, and also on the proposal for the directive on substantiation and communication of voluntary environmental claims, so the Green Claims Directive.
Really a lot of different climate change and sustainability topics there. That's wonderful. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you led the preparations on the proposal for the EU Green Claims Directive. I summarised it very quickly, but could you let our listeners know a bit more about what your work entailed and what the directive aims to achieve?
Sure. Before the European Commission puts forward a legislative proposal, there is, of course, a long process that leads to this, including extensive stakeholder consultations, preparatory studies. And this process started already in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I joined the team to work on this proposal in October 2022, so it was rather at the final stages. But that was to lead the work to finalize the legal act in the so-called inter-service consultations with the other directorates general, and also I prepared it for the adoption by the College of Commissioners. So since end of March this year, when the proposal was adopted by the Commission, we have been discussing the text with the European Parliament and with the Council, so with the EU member states. So we've been supporting the work on proposed law with the aim of facilitating an agreement between the co-legislators.
Mm-hmm.
And the key objective of this directive will be to ensure that environmental claims made by companies on goods, services, on organizations towards consumers are substantiated and that they're substantiated in line with a set of rules to ensure that these statements are scientifically robust, based on facts, and also third party verified to ensure their credibility. The directive will also set requirements on the governance of labeling schemes to
Mhm.
ensure that they're independent, transparent, that products that bear the label actually comply with the criteria, and that this compliance is regularly monitored. And finally, a really important pillar of the proposal is the ex ante third party verification by the accredited verifiers. I will talk about it later on as well, most likely. So we expect that the directive will not only increase consumers' trust in claims and labels, but will also increase legal certainty for the economic operators and also support enforcement and consumer protection authorities in their job.
Yeah, wonderful. We've talked a lot about consumer trust in greenwashing, and also how easy it is for for companies to write statements that aren't very clear. I mean, a commission study in 2020 highlighted that around 53% of the environmental claims in the EU were found to be vague, misleading, or unfounded, and that 40% were unsubstantiated. So when this study came out, were you surprised by these numbers? Because I have to say, yes, as a sustainability communicator for 13 years, who is getting more and more cynical of certain companies' claims when something is environmentally friendly, ocean friendly, I was not so surprised by this study.
Well, we were not particularly surprised either. Obviously, we identified the problem already a few years ago, and in the European Green Deal itself, when it was adopted at the beginning of 2020, we highlighted that this is a big issue. European consumers have increasingly expressed their wish to contribute to the green transition, to buy products with lower environmental impact, and to improve sustainability of their consumption overall. And obviously, companies have been quick in responding to that demand. Green claims or green messages, eco labels are widespread in the European Union. You can see them everywhere on products, product packaging, on websites, in advertising. In fact, it is estimated that around 80% of web shops, web pages, advertisements contain information about the environmental impact of products,
Mhm.
so-called green claims. Up to 76% are actually available on the products themselves. So, environmental claims can take the form of a label, logo, can be expressed as textual messages, and sometimes these claims can be more subtle or implicit, taking the form of the interplay between images and colors to create a certain impression without explicit statements. Very recently, we have completed a Eurobarometer survey that was prepared for the EU Ecolabel. And in fact, in that survey, 73% percent of respondents indicated that they do take into account environmental impacts of products during their purchasing decisions. 78% said that, in their opinion, companies often make misleading environmental claims.
That's high.
So the
Yeah.
level of mistrust is huge.
Mm.
And then, interestingly enough, 87% considered that labels should be verified by an independent organization to be credible, while today it is very often not the case. So, current consumer protection law, the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, already requires that claims made by companies are truthful, are presented in a clear, accurate, and unambiguous manner, and that there should be evidence to support the green claims available on demand to the consumer protection authorities. But it turned out that this is not enough, and we need more specific rules. Consumer protection authorities are also overwhelmed, and they're often not able to enforce these rules on a scale that is needed.
Yeah, very interesting studies and very interesting numbers on the labeling. I can give you a specific example. I had to do an anti-greenwashing training for a client recently in the Netherlands, and I read lots of research on this topic. And in the Netherlands, actually, they found that labels were often seen as marketing, and not to be trusted. So, I think you're absolutely right that it's not just a question of clamping down on like you say the colors, the greens and the text. It goes much deeper than that because the mistrust is so high at the moment.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
yeah. When the proposal was announced, the European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries said It's not easy being green. We are bombarded with information. There are 230 different eco labels on the EU market. Being able to trust green claims and labels on products is important. So clearly, some level of standardization is important. So, can you go into a little bit more detail on what you see as the role of environmental labeling schemes in the EU Green Claims Directive?
The environmental labeling schemes play a very important role. So consumers tend to have more trust in labels than individual statements made by companies because usually, as I said already, there is an expectation that if there is a label, somebody checks compliance of the product with the criteria behind the label.
Mm-hmm.
There is a reason for that because we have reliable schemes across the EU, such as the EU Ecolabel, a European and world renowned voluntary scheme that promotes goods and services that demonstrate environmental excellence and that are top performers. So it's not surprising that consumers have this expectation. Our EU Eco label is based on transparent procedures, on robust scientific evidence. So there is a big role for environmental labels. The Green Claims proposal acknowledges that role. First of all, a label is an environmental claim to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the proposal sets requirements on governance of the certification schemes, meaning the owners of the labels, so the managers of the labels, if you wish. All labels will have to be either based on such a certification scheme that is independent from products that bear the label, or should be developed by national authorities. So this is a requirement that is coming already from the latest amendments to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean in practice? It means that companies will no longer be able to create their own labels. Um, uh, this is actually a practice that happens quite a lot.
I was going to
Companies
ask, how common is that?
It's fairly common. Big companies, especially, they create their own labels that they then award to their own products to distinguish them
Mm-hmm.
maybe from all the other products that they put on the market. They
Mm-hmm.
also sometimes use the possibility of self certification or self declaration, which means that there are labels where you have a checklist and the companies simply self declare that they comply with certain criteria without it being checked by a third party.
Mm-hmm.
So this will no longer be possible. I think that's an important issue to highlight here. So all the labels that will be awarded will have to be based on a certification scheme. They will have to be third-party verified and independent from the products that bear the label. So the Green Claims Directive will set a number of criteria that these certification schemes will have to comply with. Also, the criteria to award labels, so the methodology behind the label, will also be developed in a transparent manner in consultation with the relevant stakeholders. The compliance with the labels criteria will also be regularly monitored. There should be a way of withdrawing the label in case product no longer meets the criteria. So
Mm-hmm.
all of this will be required by the Green Claims Directive.
Yeah, no, that's very good because 230 different eco labels, that is, yeah, very difficult to know what they are and who to trust. And
Absolutely.
you mentioned the EU eco label. So that's been around since 1992. It's been awarded to over 88,000 EU products. So do you have plans to further raise awareness of the EU eco label with consumers or to even extend the scope of it to new product groups in the upcoming years?
Well, definitely we want to work further on increasing the awareness of EU Ecolabel. The latest statistics already show that the EU Ecolabel is flourishing in numbers. There are almost 90,000 certified goods and services in 25 different product groups that are available on the EU market. And citizens' awareness and trust in the EU Ecolabel are increasing. Based on responses from over 25,000 citizens across 27 EU member states, we see that 38% of EU citizens recognize the EU Ecolabel logo, which is an increase of 11 percentage points since 2017. And
Mhm.
56% believe that the EU Ecolabel guarantees environmental excellence. This is good, but of course, there is big potential for improvement. And so the Commission is planning to increase its communication efforts in the next 4 years to further promote the EU Ecolabel. And now Of course, we also are looking at the possibility of extending the scope to other product groups. However, first, we do want to focus on the awareness raising. As I said, we currently have criteria for 25 different product groups. And for the future, a decision is yet to be taken. It will depend on the priorities of the next commission, the resources we want to dedicate to this, because obviously being an owner of the label is a big responsibility. As said already, the EU Ecolabel benefits from a separate regulation when all of this is very clearly spelled out. But for now, the strategy of giving priority to the consolidation of the existing portfolio and increasing awareness has been paying off. In addition, one of the priorities that we see for the EU Ecolabel in the nearest future is also to ensure coherence and synergies between the EU Ecolabel criteria and the forthcoming mandatory requirements under the Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, to ensure that the two tools reinforce each other and are fully coherent.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because obviously we've been talking about consumer trust. If consumers feel like their trust in labels overall in companies putting out labels is going down, the fact that you're focusing on having one EU eco label and focusing on raising awareness of it and monitoring the fact that it already is becoming more well known and people are believe in its what it represents. That it represents environmental excellence. That is a good sign as things get standardized and other, non-useful labels, shall we say, get phased out. Okay, so thank you to Małgorzata for joining us today. This is the first of a 2-part episode, so join us next time for part 2. And thanks to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to this podcast series and explore the entire catalogue of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. See you next time.
That was